What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of Home Built Workshop. Today, we're gonna make this really cool percussion instrument called a stomp box out of a log. Check it out. I'm going to use elm to build this stomp box. I've got a lot of elm on hand. I've had some elm trees here in my yard that have died and were taken down, so I've got a lot of stuff that I'm trying to use for different things, and I think this is going to be a cool project to use some of it up. I'm going to start off using a sled on my bandsaw to slice off a piece of this elm. Turns out that it was just a little too high with the sled, so I had to eliminate the sled and try to just cut it freehand as straight as possible.
And now on the belt sander, I'll flatten that freshly cut edge. This will make sure the bottom's nice and stable.
So hopefully you're able to see that sawdust coming out of there. That tells me that hole goes all the way through. So I want to seal that up with some epoxy before we move on.
I'm going to apply some masking tape to the bottom. This will help prevent the epoxy from just oozing out the bottom and running all over the place.
Oh, let's just play around with a little bit of pigment.
The epoxy that I'm using here is made by Total Boat, and the pigments are made by Black Diamond Pigment. Now, neither of these companies is a sponsor, but I do like both of their products and do recommend trying them out if you're looking for an epoxy or some sort of pigment. I'm just going to drizzle the epoxy down into the cracks, then we'll heat it up with a torch just to help get all the air bubbles out.
My torch sneezed, did you hear that? Ooh, don't burn it. Don't burn it. Looks more pink than it does Imperial Red. Probably didn't put enough pigment in there. Oh well, we'll have pink. Now I just need to wait for this to dry overnight. This is a very slow setting epoxy, which I like. It gives it a lot of time for it to soak into the pores and the cracks and do a really good job of sealing things up. The downside of that is it does take a long time, and now this project is on hold till tomorrow. Stay tuned.
The next day, the epoxy is nice and cured. I'll just peel off the tape and then flatten that epoxy on the belt sander. Now back at the bandsaw, I'm going to cut off a thin slice from the bottom. The little slice is going to be the bottom cover. Then I'll re-flatten the bottom as well as the thin slice.
Now I have these two pieces fitting together well, I'm going to drill some screw holes so that I can screw the bottom on.
In order to keep the pieces in alignment, I'm going to stick them together with some double-sided tape. Just before I drilled the holes, I decided I should cut the back off nice and flat. I did this while they were stuck together so that everything matched. This is going to give me a nice flat surface to mount the controls to.
No wonder it's so bumpy. Look, there's a bend in my blade right there. Do you see it? There's like a kink. It's like maybe a tooth broke off or something. I don't know. Time to change that blade out.
After drilling and countersinking the holes for the bottom, I'm going to take a few minutes and just try to lay out the parts that are going to go inside so that I can get a rough size for the cavity. Then I'll remove the bulk of that cavity using some Forstner bits on the drill press. Go ahead and leave a comment if I'm not the only one that think elm smells funky when you work it. Now using a straight cutting bit in my router, I'm just going to freehand route out the rest of the cavity. If I was going to do more of these, I would definitely make a template for this, but since this is the first one, we're just rolling with it.
Well, it's not pretty, but we got a little cavity there. I think we can work with it. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of cleanup there, I think, with a chisel, just to get me a little bit cleaner edges before we move on. A clamp like this works really well for holding odd-shaped parts. It's a little bit cleaner. I think we can move on, drill our holes in the end, and get things mounted and see what we have to work with. I guess I ought to do a quick test fit just to make sure everything's going to fit before we move on. Looks like it's going to be all right. Well, that makes me pretty happy that everything fits in there. I don't even have to modify it. All the measurements appear to have come out correct. So we're actually pretty close to wrapping this up. Now I want to screw these pieces together so that I can do some sanding. And this really is no harder than finding the screws that fit in the holes that are pre-drilled. I've got this assortment here of different sizes of wood screws. I'm just finding the one that fits the best, and that's what I'm using. Got the bottom screwed on, everything fits well. Just gonna sand this now, smooth up the outside before giving it a coat of oil. Shake well before using. And this is the part of the program where I spill Danish oil everywhere. Let's do this. Ooh, that looks cool. Now we'll let this Danish oil dry for a little while, then we can move on, get this wired up, finished. So for the electronics on this, we are going to have a volume and a tone control, as well as a piezo pickup, so it's going to be almost identical to an electric guitar. We will be able to adjust volume and tone as necessary. In order to install it, really nothing more than putting our potentiometers in there and our jack. Now all we need to do is fire up the soldering iron, get this thing soldered up. Ready, set, go. It doesn't go to 11. This thing's gonna be cool. A lot of times when I'm soldering, I try to keep something nearby that I can grab quick and use to hold the wire in place, because sometimes as soon as you pull that soldering iron off, if there's any sort of spring in the wire, it's going to want to pull away until that solder hardens. So by having something nearby, I prefer a pencil. I can put it right on there before I remove that soldering iron, and that gives the wire just a split second to cool and hold everything in place. That way it doesn't move when you pull the soldering iron off.
Once I wrap up the last of the soldering, I'm going to attach the piezo pickups to the top and the bottom using some hot glue. I've used hot glue for this application quite a lot, and I've never had one come loose.
Oh, we're so close. We are so close. Now we just need some sort of knobs on here. Now I do have some chrome knobs that we could put on there, but I do think it'd be cooler if we found some little pieces of elm to match the body that we could drill out the center and use for knobs there. That blade's a disaster. Now I can just press my little log knobs on there. That's cool. I'm gonna touch that up with some Danish oil. So now there is just one thing left to do before we try this thing out. Dang it! The one thing I can't recreate if I forget to hit record, and guess what? I forgot to hit record, just put a brand on there, and it was what I thought was a pretty cool shot. Oh well, came out good though. Let's go try this thing out, I'll show you how it works. So to make this thing work, all we need to do is plug our guitar cable into the back. We'll turn it up, and you can see we've got some noise. Tone control works just fine. Now all we need to do is just stomp on it. It's pretty cool. So you can see right away how this thing can become a percussion instrument. Now one thing, if you're gonna build something like this, when you run it through a PA or an amp of some sort, the best results that I've found are to bring your trebles down and crank your bass up. This is gonna give you a sound that most closely represents a bass drum, and that's kind of what this thing's made to replicate. There's a lot of things you could do with something like this, especially if you are maybe a solo performer, playing acoustic guitar, or some sort of a duo of some sort. This works really great as a percussion instrument to kind of add to your music and to your performance. So I hope maybe you found this video interesting. If you don't intend to ever make one of these or use one, I hope at least now you have a better understanding of this instrument that we call the Stomp Box. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.